Good morning, everyone. It's so great to be back with you guys. I have to tell you all, at the last service, there was a lot of contention over whether or not root beer popsicle should be replaced with strawberry popsicle in that last song. So it was very decisive. It was divisive, but then it became very decisive whenever we took a vote. So who votes in favor of it just being strawberry popsicle from here on out? Who wants to hang on to the root beer? We're praying for you all. Okay, that's good. All right. Jeremy and I had the joy of going on vacation the past couple weeks, and we had a fantastic time. I told you guys before I left that I'd set the bar pretty low for success for this trip, and success looked like Sam not jumping overboard on the cruise, right? We brought back home both children, so mission accomplished. Yeah, right? I mean, it's a big deal, y'all. But I knew we were going to be okay whenever he discovered that there was unlimited ice cream on the boat, and he became on a first-name basis with the attendants. So I was like, we're good. I can relax now. But we got to see a lot of beautiful places. We got to do a lot of fun things. I got to spend some in-depth time with my immediate family, which I don't always get to do. But you know what they say, there's no place like home. And you guys are a big part of home to us. Whenever I go away, I just realize this more and more. And I just love this church. It's a sentiment that I learned a couple weeks ago is shared by little Bryce Croxton. Maybe some of you know him. He's 3 years old. I was sitting in here in the church, the sanctuary. We were getting ready for regroup, and we had a food truck outside, and he got in here a little early. And all of a sudden, he came running into the room, and he said, "I love this church." I was like, great. He's like, "I got to go tell my mom." I'm like, all right. But I'm same. I feel the same way, Bryce. I love this church because you're just a beautiful group of people who are seeking to faithfully follow Jesus, and you're doing it in a very authentic way, in a way in which you're opening up your hearts to one another, and yet you all also have a whole lot of fun while you're doing it, right? And I can appreciate that. I love this church, but I also love the church universal. You know, the body of believers across the world and mysteriously across time. You know, the church, it's not perfect, right? We don't always agree with one another. And yet God has brought us together as a people to extend his love and his grace and his mercy to the world. He's chosen us to do that with him and for him. And so I love the church. I want to be very, very clear about that, okay? I love the church before I say but, okay? But bless our hearts. And yes, I do mean that in the Southern way, right? Bless our hearts. You know, we're doing the best that we can, but we've had this tendency across the history of the church to perhaps put the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable, right? We've had a tendency to, at times, really put the exclamation point only in one place. And that one place where we've tended to put the exclamation point is on a 3-letter word that I bet all of you all know. It is the word, anybody want to guess? Sin, right? We spend a lot of time, a lot of attention around that word. So when I say the word sin, I want you to go, dun, dun, dun. Are you ready? Sin. Dun, dun, dun. We've all been taught to internalize that and to hear that in our head when we talk about it, right? We've been really, really good about telling people about the bad things that good Christians should avoid. So much so that around the 6th century, the church decided, you know what, there's a lot of things we're telling people not to do. So let's just try to make this simpler, right? Let's boil this down. Let's give them the 7 big no-nos that they need to make sure they don't do. And they called these, and I'm going to need your dun-dun-dun when I say sin again, okay? They call these the 7 deadly sins. Dun-dun-dun, right? And so let's see if we can name them together. Are you ready? What are they? Anybody? Greed. Pride. Gluttony. That's next week. So enjoy the donuts this week, people. That's next week. We won't worry about that then. Lust. Envy. Greed. Did we say greed? We said greed. Wrath, which I would say is revenge. Sloth. Yes. Sloth. That's a fun one. All right, so those are the 7 deadly sins. The church has been really, really good at telling people what not to do. But here's the thing, you guys. Have you ever noticed that when someone tells you not to do something, it kind of makes you want to do it more? Anybody notice this? Yeah. Like, this is something that psychologists have studied. It's called reactance. When we feel like someone is trying to limit our freedom, we react, right? Like our tendency is to want to do whatever it takes to reclaim that freedom. And so sometimes what that looks like is when someone tells us not to do something, it just makes that thing like maybe even more appealing, or it makes us get mad at the person who's setting the boundary, or it makes us just like go ahead and cross the line and do it, right? And so, again, like, bless our hearts. Like, all this focus on sin has been a little bit counterproductive for the church, but not just because of this human tendency that we have toward reactance. And another piece of the puzzle is that the church has often told us what not to do, but failed to tell us what we should replace that with, right? We haven't painted a compelling picture of what the life-giving virtues are that we can pursue in this life. All our yelling about sin has like taken up all the oxygen, and we haven't been able to hear about the life-giving virtues that we can embrace in these no-nos place. So in Ephesians 4, verse 22, the Apostle Paul, he talks about how important this is for us to put new habits in place of the old habits that we are now trying to avoid. This is what he says. He says, you are taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your mind. So he makes it clear, yes, there are attitudes and there are actions that can corrupt. There are attitudes and actions that can harm us and harm others. There are attitudes and actions that can keep us from this good, abundant life that is the target that God has for us. And so we would be wise in that instance to take those harmful things off. You know, kind of like, you all know I'm always trying to think of a way to illustrate something. Kind of like if you had something like this on. I mean, like, dun dun dun. Like, this is yucky stuff, right? I'm sorry to, oh no. We still love you, Luke. Welcome. You know, like this is a pretty good picture. I mean, it would have been better if I had Duke to put on, but I didn't. In all honesty, I reached out to Pastor Adam. His son, Luke, swam for U of L, and I'm like, can I borrow a U of L shirt from you? And he said, did you lose a bet? That was his first thing he said to me. And then I said, I was like, no, this is what I'm using it for. He's like, we don't have anything. But, you know, like if I'm told, like, don't do this, you know, like this isn't helpful, this isn't good, and I take off this item, but no one ever tells me, like, hey, there's better teams out there. There's like winning programs that you can actually enjoy, right? That can enrich your life. No one ever tells me about those things. When basketball season rolls back around, what am I probably going to do if I don't have an alternative? I'm going to like reach for the old familiar thing, right? I'm just going to put it right back on. Not me, but you know, hypothetically, right? Hypothetically. There's just this void that exists there. That's why Paul doesn't stop here in this passage. He doesn't just say for us to take off the old habits and then go through this list of thou shalt nots. He doesn't just leave us standing there vulnerable with nothing to wear. Instead, this is what he says in verse 24. He says, and put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. He says, replace the old with something new. You know, you all know where this is going. With something better. With something more life-giving. With something richer. Here we go. Oh, so much better, you guys. So much better. You know, something holy and righteous. I'm not going to get struck by lightning. But he implores us to take off these old habits and to put on new ones that will help us enjoy the abundant, full life that God wants for us, not just one day when we get in heaven, but here and now in the present. And so that's our hope throughout this series, is to lift up these virtues, right? These virtues that tend to get drowned out. Like, what is it we need to put on? Our hope is to put the right emphasis on the right syllable. Our hope is to put the exclamation point in the appropriate place so that we can truly live this full, abundant life as we seek to follow Jesus, instead of us just going around anxious all the time, wondering if we've accidentally done one of the no-nos, right? And so what is it that we need to take off in order to thrive? What is it that we need to take off so that we can put something better on in its place? Last week, Carla talked to you about taking off pride and putting on, does anybody remember? Humility. Humility. And this week, we're going to turn our attention to what Shakespeare called the green-eyed monster, which is envy, right? And we're going to talk about its replacement, kindness. And so what is envy? Well, first of all, envy is an emotion. It's something that we feel, that we as human beings, we experience this feeling in our lives. And this is another place where I feel like it's important for me today to pause and to say another bless our hearts for the church. We've tended to say that emotions are either good or bad, to put them into groups and say, these are emotions that are okay for you to feel, but these are emotions that a good Christian should never feel at all, which has caused a whole lot of denial in Christians' lives, which has caused a lot of shame whenever this feeling or emotion pops up in our lives, and it's caused a lot of feelings to come out sideways. But here's the truth. There are not good and bad emotions. No, God gave us all of these emotions, this whole array of them. And whenever we feel these things, they're meant to be information. They're always this invitation for us to get curious. But the problem can come in whenever we don't get curious, right? When we just let these emotions happen in our lives and they go unchecked. This is true of envy, which simply put is wanting what someone else possesses. That's the simple definition here. The church has often said to us, just don't do that, okay? Got it? Everybody on that page? But let me ask you a question. Who here has ever wanted what someone else possesses? I'll go first. Right? Like, all of us have. Every one of us. We all feel envy from time to time, and it might shock you to hear this coming from a pulpit, but envy is not all bad. It has a purpose. Okay? If you think about it, seeing what someone else has and you wanting it, in the positive way, it can be motivation for you to move in a better direction. It might awaken this desire or longing in you for something that is more fulfilling and life-giving. It might inspire you to make a needed change. It's possible for us to envy what someone else has and for us to be perfectly happy for that person, right? And for us to recognize, you know what? I might want some of that in my life as well. You all watch Jeremy stand up here and play the guitar week after week after week. But did you know that Jeremy did not learn how to play the guitar until he was an adult? He was 18 years old, and he was watching Sheryl Crow play the guitar on TV. And he said, you know what? I want that. I want that kind of skill. And so he went to work, and he started to learn to play the guitar. Envy can do that. It can motivate us to improve ourselves, to move in a positive direction. But again, the problem comes in when envy goes unchecked. Whenever we either deny that we're feeling envy at all, or we just let it run rampant, right? Instead of pausing to get curious. Because here's what unchecked envy does. It warps our perspective. We begin to see everything through the lens of scarcity, which changes the way that we see absolutely everything. Right? It changes the way that we see our world. It changes the way we see others. It changes the way that we even see God himself. When we're looking through that lens of scarcity that envy gives us, it tries to tell us that our world is this wasteland where there's never enough. And if that's true, then that means that person sitting next to you, they're your competitor. and you have to look out for yourself and make sure that you're victorious. And then, it causes you to look at God and be like, well, God must not care or be that concerned about taking care of me. I've got to take care of myself. Unchecked envy, it moves us from wanting what someone else has to us wanting something to be ripped away from someone else for us to have it. That's a big difference, right? It makes us start to grumble to ourselves, must be nice, and start to resent that other person. However, what we might not recognize whenever we start to look at our world through the lens of envy and scarcity is that, yes, it's shaping the way that we're seeing everything outside of us, but it's also shaping how we see ourselves, right? What it does to us is it makes us continually afraid that we're not measuring up. We're like constantly looking around, comparing ourselves to others and trying to see, where we are in the order. How many of you guys have seen the movie Inside Out? Or either of them? Yeah, lots of us, right? I'm not really a crier. I cry every time I watch these movies. I feel like they really get this. But in the second movie, they introduce a new character, and they introduce the character Envy. And this is what Envy looks like. And I think one of the most brilliant things about when they introduce this character is that they do some things on Envy's outside that you can see to help you understand how we internally experience this emotion. For example, how many fingers does Envy have? She has 4, right? Not 5, but 4. And it's, again, this outward depiction of how unchecked envy can make us feel internally. It can make us feel incomplete. It can make us feel insufficient. It can make us always feel like we're lacking something in our lives. Unchecked envy warps our perspective. And it causes us to not see things as they truly are. And so the result is that as we're pursuing, flourishing, and thriving in this life, we can just find ourselves running into walls again and again and again. I'm going to go ahead and apologize for what I'm about to show you, but it's kind of like these kids in a maze of mirrors. Let's watch. Maybe. Let's see.
These are the funniest kids' mirror maze fails. Little bro had enough and just crashed out. You can't get up?
That's not funny!
Okay, first of all, I do not know what it says about us as parents that we would video this happening to our children and then put it out on the internet. That probably lines up with one of the other 7 deadly sins that we're not talking about today. But this is what envy does, right? It warps our perspective. We're not seeing things as they truly are, which gets super dangerous for us very, very, very quickly. It leaves us beaten up and defeated. And it's keeping us trapped, right? We can't get out. We can't get to this abundant life that God so wants for us. The book of James talks about this. James is writing to an early community of believers of Jesus who have perhaps gotten a little too big for their britches, all right? They're going around and they're proclaiming themselves wise to everyone else, yet they're being competitive with one another. They're always comparing themselves to one another. They're showing favoritism to some people, but not to others. And so while they're going around thinking that they're wise, James in chapter 3, he gives them a bit of a reality check. This is what he says to them. He says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice." When envy warps our perspective, it causes chaos. It causes chaos within us and outside of us. it wreaks havoc on our relationships. And so how is it that we can keep envy in check? How is it that we can identify that we're experiencing envy and take it off and put on something better in its place? Well, James, he's already hinted at this. If we go back to verse 13, this is what he'd said. He said, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom." Simply put, he says, it's through kindness. And then he goes on and he describes it in a more flowery way in verse 17. He says, "But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness." Kindness, right? Deeds done in humility that are pure, that are peace-loving, that are considerate, that are submissive, that are full of mercy and good fruit, that are impartial and sincere. If envy warps our perspective, here's what kindness does. It widens it. Because what kindness does is it helps us to see things, our world, others, and even ourselves from God's perspective. You see, when our God looks at our world, he doesn't see a wasteland where there isn't enough, but rather what he sees is abundance. And when our God looks and he sees all these people around us, he doesn't see competitors, but rather he sees his children. And when God looks at me and you, he doesn't look at us and see someone who's insufficient. He doesn't look at us and see someone who's incomplete, but rather he looks at us and he sees his beautiful creation. Our God looks at us through the lens of kindness. And he sees how all of us are connected and interdependent, how all of us are kin. I don't know if you've ever noticed this about the word kindness in the English language, but have you ever noticed that the word kindness has the word kin in it, right? And this is not an accident. This root of this word was used on purpose because it's based on the idea that in general, not always, but in general, we show our immediate family compassion and care and affection. In general, the expectation is that you are kind to your family because you are the same kind. And then over time, this word, it expanded to recognize that all of humanity could be considered the same kind, that all of us are kin, and that we should treat one another in such a way that is reflective of that. This is the wisdom come from heaven that James is speaking about. Looking at one another like God does. Looking at one another with the deepest of kindness, recognizing that we are connected as brothers and sisters. Seeing that we aren't in competition for scarce resources, but rather we were made for cooperation. Cooperation in this world where there is more than enough for us to share and for us to enjoy with one another. Now, unlike envy, kindness is not an emotion, right? It's an action. It's something we have to deliberately put on. But the more we do it, the more natural it comes for us. So how can we get practical about this? We know the answer is not just don't be envious, right? That's not the answer. Again, we're all going to feel this from time to time. So when we feel it, here's the first thing I would encourage you to do. The first thing is to admit our envy. You know, instead of trying to ignore it or explain it away or just tell ourselves not to feel that way, we have to be honest with ourselves because we can't take off what we're pretending we don't have on, right? And so once we do that, once we admit our envy, then we have to accept kindness for ourselves, right? Instead of beating ourselves up and drowning in shame, we have to be able to show ourselves compassion. And whenever we show ourselves compassion and we kind of talk to ourselves like we would a close friend, then we can start to get curious about this, right? We can start to ask ourselves, like, what is this feeling trying to teach me? You know, what is it that I'm longing for and I feel like I'm missing? You know, what are the actions I might need to take in this direction? Sometimes we're going to get curious and we're going to be like, you know what? I don't even need that thing that I thought I wanted. And then other times, we're going to discover, yeah, there is a real longing here. And we can begin to partner with God to like take steps in that direction. I remember years ago, I read a book by an author named Shana Nyquist, and she talked about envy. And she said like, she had noticed like she was super bitter toward this one friend of hers that seemed to have all kinds of free time, was able to go do these things with her kids and have hobbies. And at that time she was like drowning in her work. And so she was like super upset with this person in her life. But then finally when she got curious, she recognized like that person had not done anything to her, but rather she was just longing for something that she had, that she saw that she had space in her life to enjoy certain things. And so Shana said like, I had to start working with God to discern like, what do I need to say no to so that I have space in my life? That's what we can do when we accept God's kindness for ourselves. And then once we've done that, once we've admitted that we are envious, and once we have accepted kindness, then we can extend kindness to others. You know, instead of harboring those negative feelings or lashing out at them and thinking that they're a competitor that needs to be eliminated, what we can do is we can bless them. We can wish them well. We can celebrate with them and for them, seeing them as our brother or sister that we want the very best for. Envy, it is inevitable in our lives. We are all going to feel it. But we can keep it in check with kindness. If envy warps our perspective, then kindness will always widen it to help us see things more from God's perspective. And if we ever wonder, you know, like what does kindness look like, then we need look no further than Jesus. Jesus who looked at us and he saw his kin. He saw his brothers and his sisters, and he willingly laid down his life so that we can come fully alive.